Welcome to Motivational Mondays. This is Fed Razak, Senior Trading Strategist here at CMTrading. And today we're going to break down the concept of opportunity cost. But before we start, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, especially if you find value in this presentation. So when I was taking Economics 101, okay, this is 20 plus years ago, the third concept they taught us in Economics 101 after supply and demand, and that's sure to affect the price level of any given product, right, is a concept called opportunity cost. Now, every country collects taxes and tariffs from either their citizens or people traveling in or through import and exports, whatever it is. The country produces an X amount of money, of revenue in their bank account that then they allocate to different things that they feel as elected officials and as officials that represent the public as to what's that country's main priorities. Many of these things include military spending, it includes housing development, it includes infrastructure development. It also includes things like healthcare development and schools and etc. And the list just goes down, right? The list is almost endless, right? The amount of things that countries could actually lift up the country, right, by allocating certain funds towards these categories. Now, at any given time, when there's one category of things that receives money, then it means another category will not. So if I'm allocating money towards military, that means will be less money to allocate for the subsidizing of housing, for the subsidizing of food, for the subsidizing of anything else that comes as secondary to that. And guess what? There's a loss here. There's an opportunity cost. There's a cost by allocating money towards one area and kind of putting aside all these other areas. And as a result, these other areas are affected by it. So what is called the opportunity cost is that if I would have taken some of that money instead of putting it in military and put it into education or put it into infrastructure development or put it into healthcare, that it would have affected the country quite differently. And there is a cost incurred to the country for not allocating those funds towards here as well. Now, remember, at the same time, putting money towards the military is a high priority thing, right? You don't want to be leaving yourself vulnerable for other people to attack you. So this is really the balance of each country's dilemma as to how to allocate funds to other areas so that, altogether you come out somewhat balanced, you come out somewhat effective. You're maximizing as much as you can in order to be the most that you possibly could as a country. Now, if you look at every country, it's almost everyone will have military at the top of the list, right? Because we're vulnerable in that area. That seems to be an area that, despite the fact that we have the UN and everything else, right, that most places around the world are keeping somewhat of a peaceful treaty with their neighbors. Nevertheless, it's something that is allocated, okay? Now, putting that aside for a second, when we attribute certain funds to one, there's another fund, there's another area that it receives less, as I've spoken about before, and as a result, it affects it. Now, if we look at the opportunity cost of our life, okay, if we decide time is an opportunity cost, I could allocate X amount of time to my life for doing X. That means somewhere else I'm going to be affected. If I'm working 14 to 17 hours a day, that means my family life will be affected. Now, as a whole, I have to look at the whole picture. I have to look at what I'm doing as my sustenance, okay, my income, but I nevertheless have to look at, helping my family grow. So what's my goal here? So if a country or a person really looks at their goal, they're able to maneuver and they're able to allocate the proper and balanced amount to whatever it is they're looking to focus on. Okay, so yes, in order for me to have this, to have a family, I need to have some sustenance, I need to have income. But at the same time, in order for me to have a future with my family, I need to make sure that I'm available for them and make sure that I'm leading them as a father, as a role model, as someone that's nurturing them emotionally as well. So between the two, I've got to find a balance. Now that balance is a very important And I would add probably the most important element of one's life, to know how to balance these two areas, okay? And once we know how to balance these two areas, now these two things you could change. It could be one's sustenance and one's education, right? If you're not there with a family yet, but you want to, increase your intelligence and increase your knowledge, then you have to come up with some sort of income in order for you to live. But at the same time, you have another quadrant to kind of say, okay, well, how am I going to add value to myself by pursuing an education, by adding a level or a degree on my current status so that I could explore more. At any given time, okay, we always have this opportunity cost. And I think it's really a very important exercise that we utilize in reassessing our lives just in general about what should be our focal point when. And if you use this formula of opportunity cost, it will add that much more value to your time. And it also adds some focus to each area. Because if you realize you only have 10 hours to do a 14-hour day job in 10 hours, you'll squeeze it in. It'll be much more concentrated. And if you realize you have only 20 minutes to an hour to spend time with your kids or your family or to pursue a higher education, then you'll make the most of that time as well. And you'll stay more focused and that much more energized. Thank you for joining me for this Motivational Mondays. We'll see you here next week.